Russia. The biggest country on Earth. It's a place where an ex-KGB agent is in charge, where corruption is sky high, where an average monthly salary is around $650, but also a country that is always in the scrutiny of the West and where winters are freezing cold. So, why the heck would anyone want to pay attention to Russia and consider to invest time and money there? Hi, everyone. Basic Investor here. This week I am talking about Russia, not about Russia itself that much, but the land, forests, and waters Russia possesses. Just like I said in the beginning, Russia is the biggest country on Earth, and by that I mean it can offer a lot of natural resources, not just for a domestic market but for the whole world. And the biggest player in the game is the oil. No, it's not the oil, at least not for long. It's the Russian agriculture industry. But before we get to that, let's start from the beginning, or at least from the fall of the USSR. After the fall of the Soviet Union, Russia was economically devastated and left with a poor infrastructure, huge debts, rusty army, people were leaving the country on the highest rate ever, and the agriculture was on the level of some third world country. An agricultural phoenix? The agriculture industry in Russia suffered a major setback following disintegration of the Soviet Union in 1991. However, over the years the scenario has changed drastically. The establishment of separate Russian Federation and change in the legal environment has played a crucial role in resurrection of agricultural industry in Russia. Today, agriculture industry in Russia is growing at a fast pace. Though Russia is primarily an industrial economy, the agriculture industry is huge. The agriculture industry in Russia accounts for about 6% of the total national GDP. Also, agriculture is one of the largest employment-providing industries in Russia. Agriculture industry provides employment opportunities to more than 16% of the Russian population. Although Russia is a snow-clad nation, it has a huge area of land meant for cultivation of crops. Russia has well over 23 million hectares of cultivable land. The most important crops grown in Russia are mostly grains. Grain cultivation occupies more than 50% of cultivable land area. The most dominant food crop cultivated across Russia is wheat. Wheat accounts for more than 70% of the total grain production in the country. Russian farmers cultivate wheat during both winter and spring seasons. Besides wheat, Russia cultivates barley, oat, corn, soya beans, potato, and much more. Basically every vegetable essential for human survival. But a crop-rich land is not the only available source of goods. Water in Russia has the riches on its own. In the cold waters of the Barents Sea, Russian aquaculture, the country's largest salmon producer, has increased production more than six-fold in 2017 alone. That combined with the crop production makes Russia as the food paradise on Earth. The industry is booming in recent years, not because everybody likes agriculture all of a sudden, but mainly because a bunch of sanctions which are coming from the West. Around Russia, farms, fields, greenhouses, and fertilizer factories are thriving as consumers turn to domestically produced food, helped by the worst relations between Moscow and the West for a generation. After the EU and US imposed sanctions on some Russian businesses following the country's invasion of Ukraine and annexation of Crimea in 2014, Moscow hit back with sweeping bans on Western food imports. Overnight, about 60% of the country's total meat and fish imports were banned, and 50% of dairy, vegetable, and fruit imports, creating a huge opportunity for domestic producers. Total food imports from the EU fell 40% between 2013 and 2016. Russian agriculture is booming and we certainly see a lot of interest from foreign investors, said Andrei Guryev, chief executive of major Russian fertilizer company Fosagro. But hold on a second. It's not all that sunny. According to Stratfor science and technology analyst Rebecca Keller, the wheat production is huge and growing, but the quality of the crops is not what was expected, which affects the wheat production and causes supply problems within Russia at the moment. If you are interested to see and hear more on that subject, please check the link to their video I left down in the description box. But what does all this mean to someone looking forward to invest in the Russian agriculture? Enter the climate change.
Well, I'm not a big believer in man-made climate change. There could be some impact, but I don't believe it's a devastating impact.
The term weather refers to how the atmosphere behaves in a specific area over a short period of time, usually hours or days. Climate refers to general weather patterns over a broad area for a long period of time. Both weather and climate account for qualities like temperature, precipitation, and humidity. The global climate is warming at an unprecedented rate. An overwhelming body of evidence suggests global temperatures will continue to rise, and that human activities such as fossil fuel combustion, deforestation, and agriculture are the dominant cause. These activities release greenhouse gas emissions, such as carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide, that trap the sun's heat and warm the atmosphere, hence the name greenhouse. Natural processes also produce greenhouse gas emissions, however, these have generally been counterbalanced by the capacity of trees, soil, oceans, and other storehouses to capture and store emissions. Climate change is among the greatest threats of our generation and of generations to come to public health, ecosystems, and the economy. The projected impacts of climate change, many of which are already occurring, include more frequent and intense hurricanes, floods, heat waves, and other extreme weather events, increased heat-related deaths, food and water shortages, forced migration from rising sea levels and natural disasters, increased damages from flooding and wildfires, spreading insect-borne and waterborne diseases. Scientists and world leaders have called for immediate and dramatic action to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, enhance emission sinks, and prepare for the impacts that are expected to occur. The food system is one of the areas where urgent interventions are needed the most. Impacts of climate change on agriculture. Agriculture has always been at the mercy of unpredictable weather, but a rapidly changing climate is making agriculture an even more vulnerable enterprise. In some regions, warmer temperatures may increase crop yields, like in Russia. The overall impact of climate change on agriculture, however, is expected to be negative, reducing food supplies and raising food prices. Many regions already suffering from high rates of hunger and food insecurity, including parts of sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia, are predicted to experience the greatest declines in food production. Elevated levels of atmospheric carbon dioxide are also expected to lower levels of zinc, iron, and other important nutrients in crops. With changes in rainfall patterns, farmers face dual threats from flooding and drought. Both extremes can destroy crops. Higher temperatures increase crops' water needs, making them even more vulnerable during dry periods. Food system activities, including producing food, transporting it, and storing wasted food in landfills, produce greenhouse gas emissions that contribute to climate change. Of these sources, livestock production is the largest, accounting for an estimated 14.5% of global greenhouse gas emissions from human activities. Meat from ruminant animals, such as cattle, goats, is particularly emissions intensive. World leaders have agreed that in order to avoid the most catastrophic climate change scenarios, average global temperature rise must not exceed 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. Even if this goal is met, many climate impacts, such as sea level rise, will likely still continue for centuries. But how all this would affect Russia? Benefits in Russia from climate change. At the moment, the global warming impact on Russian agriculture is currently assessed as favorable. It has already considerably reduced the number of winters with low air temperatures threatening winter crops. In many regions, the vegetation period has increased by 5-10 days. The vegetation period for field crops has been lasting longer. For instance, in Stavropol territory, due to climate change, the rated grain crop capacity has increased by 30%. As growing seasons become longer and precipitation patterns change, using lands for agricultural purposes that previously would have been too far north, too cold for too much of the year, will become possible. An assessment has been made on the impact of climate change on Russian agriculture in 2030. Regarding food supply, the long-standing popular presumption in Russia has been that a warmer global climate would translate into a significantly more hospitable Russian environment for agricultural production. Indeed, there are several respects in which climate change by 2030 will reduce long-standing challenges for Russian agriculture. First and foremost, growing seasons have already become longer and are predicted to become longer still. Accompanying this change will be a reduction in the frequency of winter temperatures that are sufficiently bitter to damage winter plantings. More sensitive varieties of winter plantings will be possible in much of Russia by 2030, and it will be possible to plant existing varieties farther north than would have been the case in the past. Based on temperature ranges expected by 2030, it will also be possible to introduce entirely new crops that are not widely grown in Russia today. To make long story short, the global climate change is ongoing and is evident. Many areas across the globe would be negatively affected by these changes, but a few places, among which is Russia, will benefit at the end. The food prices will grow, food processing costs will skyrocket, and you should be thinking investing into food and agriculture industries of Russia. There are many Russian agriculture investment funds available on the market and many food and agricultural companies in which anybody can invest. Even Jim Rogers, chairman of Belive Interests Inc., and manager of the Rogers International Commodities Index, suggests that is a good idea to get into Russian agricultural market. Jim Rogers at his legendary Quantum Fund, is leveraging Russia's agriculture renaissance as his next big investment. The investing activity of Rogers draws notice for his past record. In the first 10 years of the Quantum Fund, the portfolio returned 4,200%, while the S&P 500 increased nearly 50%. Today, he invests through his company, Rogers Holdings. In addition, Rogers joined Foss Agro's board on September 14, 2014, offering some insight into his thinking in the announcement. Foss Agro is an excellent company that offers investors excellent value due to the high-quality fertilizers it produces, its vertical integration and low production costs. I have watched the company successfully develop as a global player over the last few years, with flexible sales and production models that have helped it reach new markets, while investments in its Russian production assets have enabled Foss Agro to expand and improve its product portfolio. Just before I close this video, I would like to say, if you think to invest in Russian food and agriculture industry, don't put your investment today expecting some huge return tomorrow, but rather invest today to thank yourself for doing so, someday in 10 to 15 years from now. I hope you enjoyed my views on this subject, and if you did, please hit a like and leave a comment. What do you think about all of this? Next week we will continue a discussion about Monero, how and where to buy it for a fiat currency and how to trade with it. Until next time, thanks for watching.